When Steve Cohen took over the Mets, he walked in with a big wallet and even bigger expectations. But as we hit July in year 5 of the Steve Cohen era, the only thing the Mets are hitting is the skids. Just how bad is it? We tackle that and a whole lot more next on Gordon Damer on Sports. Hey, welcome back. Brand new edition of Gordon Damer on Sports. On today's edition, we will talk with our buddy Dan Graca from ESPN Radio, get his thoughts on where the Mets are at these days. I will give you the funniest sports headline you have heard in quite some time, courtesy of the New York Post. We'll hit on the one team in the NBA that is trying to deny reality. But where we begin is with those New York Mets. Yes, Met fans, welcome to July. And now that we're past July 1st, I can wish you a happy belated Bobby Bonilla Day. You know that day every single year, you get reminded of just how bad things used to be for this franchise. Every July 1st, Bobby Bonilla, who last played for the Mets in 1999, gets to collect a check for $1.19 million. He'll continue to collect that money every July 1st until 2035 because back when the Mets were run by Fred Wilpon, they chose, of course, to defer that $6 million they owed him, opting instead for a long-term payout structure with annual interest. A deal that didn't look great at the time, now kind of feels borderline criminal. Wilpon thought that he'd make more money investing elsewhere, particularly because he had this amazing investment guy, this guy by the name of Bernie Madoff. And he turned a relatively small buyout into a decades-long punchline for the Mets and their fans. It's not the only example of just how bad things were under the Wilpons, but it's the one that comes up most regularly because every year we're reminded of it. Of course, the Madoff scandal helped eventually force Wilpon to sell the team, so I guess it's not all bad. But why is that important now? Why is it important today? Sure, that's old news and it's overdone to death, but I think it kind of illustrates a larger point. Let's go back to 2020. Enter Steve Cohen, the billionaire hedge fund manager, lifelong Mets fan, and for many, the savior of the franchise. He was going to be the new George Steinbrenner. And when Cohen took over, he promised a new day, a new standard. His introductory press conference even came with this quote: "If I don't win a World Series in the next 3 to 5 years, I'd consider that somewhat of a disappointment." Well, here we are in year 5, and the results, no World Series appearances, no championships. Now, I'm not here to say that Cohen hasn't improved the franchise. He has. He's made the Mets relevant. He's spent money. He's modernized the front office with analytics. He's removed the stench of years of mediocrity and incompetence. But he also promised results. And this season, like others even before he took over, is spiraling quickly. The last 5 years of the Wilpons, the Mets averaged just 82 wins. The 4 years of Steve Cohen so far, they've averaged 85. It's better, but not nearly enough as we thought. And if I had told you when Steve Cohen took over that in year 5, there would still not be a World Series appearance or heck, even a division title, I don't think anyone would have thought that acceptable. But let's walk through how we got here, because despite the big names, the record-setting payroll, and the super high expectations, the Mets once again find themselves in a very familiar spot, seemingly overhyped and under-delivering, and right now, as we speak, in danger of letting another season slip away. So let's talk about David Stearns. He arrived with an impeccable reputation built on a consistent winner in Milwaukee, understood pitching, preached sustainability, and he was the grown-up in the room the Mets have been lacking for decades. But with all due respect, what he built in Milwaukee, the pressure here is a little bit different. You're not asked to win 88 games and sneak in as a wild card. You're expected to win 95, maybe a division, to spend big and draft well. It's a delicate tightrope, but one that Stearns is getting paid the big bucks for. Now take last year, his first trade deadline, and he opted for restraint, addressed the bullpen, added a left-handed bat. Nothing flashy, nothing too costly, and it worked. The team caught fire down the stretch, made a deep postseason run, and Stearns was praised for not sacrificing the future in a blind chase for the present. But this year, the situation is a little messier, and that same cautious approach might not be enough. So the numbers you probably know by now. Since June 13th, Friday the 13th, mind you, the Mets have gone 3-13. Let me repeat that. 3 wins in 16 games. And it has not just been the losses, it's how they've lost. This past weekend, they went to Pittsburgh, got completely destroyed by a Pirates team that, and up until that series, had the worst offense in baseball. And the Mets got swept and were outscored 30-4. That's not a blip. That is a nosedive. And it was not just one bad week, it's been a couple of bad weeks now. And the difference has been stark. Before the collapse, the Mets had a 5.5 game lead in the National League East. They were 21 games over 500, and their rotation ERA, the best in baseball, 2.79. Their bullpen, second best at 2.89. Now, that rotation ERA in the past 16 games is over 6, dead last in the league. The bullpen, 29th in ERA in that span. And in 11 of those 16 games, the Mets did not feature a Mets starter going 5 innings. That's not just a bad rotation. That impacts the bullpen. Now, the injuries certainly have not helped. Kodai Senga, their ace, sidelined with the hamstring strain. He went down June 12th, which is kind of fitting that the slide started the next day. You've had the Griffin Canning injury, Tyler McGill, Sean Manaea's had a setback in his rehab. Frankie Montas just got back and already got lit up by Pittsburgh. Now, you can blame the injuries all you want, but every team in baseball has injuries. The difference between the good teams and the bad teams is how they respond, and the Mets so far have folded. Now, if it was just the rotation, that would be one thing, but it's not just the rotation. It's not just that the bullpen is overworked. It's the lineup too. It's the whole team. This team, despite boasting the highest payroll in the sport, has no area that's currently clicking. The offense, as you've probably heard, hitting .217 with runners in scoring position. That's the second worst mark in baseball. And this is not just a June thing. We're more than halfway through the baseball season. Now, the Mets have their stars. Juan Soto's been brilliant. One of the only reasons this team is kind of still afloat. His June was what you expect out of Juan Soto. Francisco Lindor, I think, is better than his stats suggest. He's been a little unlucky, but not unproductive. And Pete Alonso's been inconsistent, but he's still dangerous. The problem is, after that, it's basically a black hole. Hitters 6 through 9 in this lineup, their OPS is below 600. That's not underperformance. That's replacement level. And again, you'd think a team with the highest payroll would have some depth. So we're into July. The trade deadline is at the end of the month. And a few weeks ago, it looked like the front office might be in decent shape, just shopping for some bullpen arms, that would be all they'd need to put the finishing touches on things, tweak here, tweak there, but not anymore. June has exposed deep flaws. And one flaw that we kind of thought going into the season and has turned out to be a mirage, and that is the starting rotation. We didn't think it was going to be that great, but then when it was, we thought, well, maybe David Stearns really is a genius. But now we're getting to see his genius has limits. So when you're talking about the shopping list, you're talking about a reliable starter, ideally somebody who's like a number 2 in a rotation. You need a power bat, preferably somebody who could play third base and bring some punch and life to the bottom half of the lineup. And then like most teams, they probably need another high leverage reliever, someone who can set up Diaz and handle the 7th or 8th innings without blowing up. So look, the Mets have resources, they have a farm system, but this is the kind of high wire situation David Stearns is not typically comfortable in. This is a guy who's got a long-term approach, and for every win-now move he's asked to make, there's a lingering cost. And Stearns has been clear. He doesn't want to trade away his best prospects. Nobody does. Steve Cohen certainly supports a long-term vision. He's always said he wants to build a Dodgers-style powerhouse, one that blends big spending with elite player development. But right now, that might be a philosophical luxury because the Mets this year don't look like they're one piece away. They're 3, maybe 4 pieces away. And the only way you get there might involve giving up some good stuff. So look, I don't want to paint too dark a picture. Maybe things turn around, especially if Kodai Senga comes back or Sean Manaea can get healthy. It certainly would help if Mark Vientos could get back to what he looked like last year, or Francisco Alvarez could ever find himself. And if you want to find the silver lining, the fact that this slump has happened now rather than after the trade deadline is probably a good thing. There's still time to make moves. Of course, the problem is acting might not be that simple. The trade market this year probably is not going to be that robust. The National League is deep this year with good teams. And with the expanded playoff format, very few teams consider themselves out of it and are going to sell at the deadline. So if the pool of sellers is thinner than ever, that means the prices are going to be higher and the Mets' bargaining position is not going to be great. Now, I get it. You don't want a replay of the Javi Baez for Pete Crow Armstrong deal, but the flip side is doing nothing could waste yet another year of a championship window. And certainly David Stearns has to balance winning now and the long-term vision, but again, that's why he gets paid the big bucks. It's the job he was hired for, and now we get to see if he can actually do it. Last year, his patience paid off. This year might require a different approach, and one that he is not always comfortable with. Now again, not to lose sight of the standings. Even after June, the Mets are still just 2 games back of the Phillies, so they're within striking distance. But that gap can grow fast. The Phillies are playing with urgency. The National League is deeper this year. You've got 7 teams in the wild card race that are at or above 500, and that does not include the Braves, who have been known to get hot in the second half and really go on a run. So there's a lot of baseball left, but this is not the time for complacency. The Mets need to turn this thing around, but only if the moves start now. Now, do I think the Mets are going to miss the playoffs? No, I don't. And if you make the playoffs, that's all that matters. You get in the tournament, and then you take your chances. 5 years ago, Steve Cohen walked in with deep pockets and bold promises. And the uncomfortable truth is, but 5 years in, there's been more payroll than progress. Been a ton of money spent, but not a lot to show for it. Yeah, the Mets are better run and they look more professional, but it's not just the payroll that's higher, it's the expectations that have been raised too. And you would think by year 5 of the Steve Cohen regime, there would be some consistency. So the season's not over, not by a long shot, but if July looks anything like June for the New York Mets, the season will soon be over. And if this season ends the way it's trending, it will be remembered not just as another Mets disappointment, but the most expensive one they've had. All right, now we're joined by Dan Graca from ESPN Radio. Does a lot of stuff with the Jets pre- and post-game. He's looking forward, of course, to everything at Wimbledon. But the reason we're talking with Dan today is about the Mets. So, Dan, thanks for popping on. And I guess the first thing right away is, how concerned are you about your Mets?
Well, Gordon, first of all, great to be with you as always. The Mets, yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? The June swoon has come and gone, as they say, and the only reason we say that is because it's no longer June, right? It's a new month, right. So we're gonna have to come up with if it doesn't turn around, we're gonna have to come up with a new term that rhymes with July, I guess. July cry. I mean, I don't know, but I think if there's a team that is looking forward to the All-Star break right now, it's probably the Mets. They could use it because the thing that got them off and running this year, as you probably know, the first couple of months was the way the starting pitching performed. And I think it caught a lot of us by surprise because when you look at those names that they were trotting out there every 5 days, at least at the beginning of the season, you were like, well, how are they going to be able to keep this going? Clay Holmes hadn't been a starting pitcher since, pre-pandemic. It's been that long, right? Guys like Frankie Montas, who didn't exactly wow in his first tour of duty in New York, of course, when he was acquired by Brian Cashman and the Yankees. Some of these, Kodai Senga coming off of a season that virtually was complete wash for him. David Peterson, who really hadn't been a consistent starting pitcher in the big leagues. Tyler McGill, who, may be nothing more than a 5th starter or a long guy, really, in his big league career. So the fact that these 5 guys were able to keep it going, really not even miss a beat in terms of even being sidelined for a start, and to perform as well as they did, to where they had the best staff ERA. That's what got this team off and running in, 20 games over 500, first place. And then June hits and the injuries start to take shape and all of a sudden the bats dry up. And the thing for the life of me, Gordon, is how could a team with Lindor and Soto and Alonso, how can they be 29th in baseball hitting with runners in scoring position? And it's not even a small sample size, right? We're halfway through the season. So I'm a little bit surprised how it's kind of just bottomed out like this over the last couple of weeks and how it really has happened in a short amount of time. The middle of June, this team was 21 games over 500. And now we're sitting here in the first couple of days of July and they're no longer in first place. They had a 5.5 game lead. They squandered that. So, yeah, I'm a little surprised at how it all just kind of fell apart as fast as it did.
And David Stearns has this reputation of being able to find pitching on the cheap. So when it was working like it was, at least for me, I kind of chalked it up to the genius of David Stearns. But obviously there has been a course correction, which part of it has to do with injuries. The Kodai Senga one is the real killer because that's the one guy I think in that rotation that has a reputation and can be that kind of top flight guy. But is it now the type of thing where you have to be concerned about the rest of this rotation and what it's going to look like for the rest of the year, at least before the trade deadline?
No doubt, because, Sean Manaea, we don't know what his deal is, right? He was supposed to be back, and then all of a sudden he's getting close, and now he's got loose bodies in his elbow, and he gets a cortisone shot. I don't know about you, but I haven't had a cortisone shot because I don't think a cortisone shot is something you just wake up one morning and be like, instead of that cup of coffee today, let's go get a cortisone shot. You get cortisone shots when something's wrong. So how do we know he's going to respond to that? And he's going to be on this mound for the rest of the year, pitching like he did in the second half of last season. You just don't know that. So that's another concern. And you mentioned David Stearns. You're right. Historically, he's somebody that doesn't want to allocate a lot of resources to starting pitching. And they went on the cheap this year with somebody, or last offseason rather, with somebody like Luis Severino and pinched pennies with him. And he wanted a couple of $1 million more a year. They said, no, how about 2 for 34? And he said no, and so he got the money from the A's, which, whatever, he got his money, but he's not happy. And they gave that money to Frankie Montas. He took it. So my concern is once the trade deadline gets closer, and the Mets clearly have to go out there and improve the starting pitching, are they going to go out there and attack it on the cheap again and really not try to bring in somebody that can actually make a difference? Or are they going to try to just nibble on the open market and maybe trade for a guy who's no better than a back end of the rotation guy, strength in numbers type of deal? Because apparently their top pitching prospects in the minor leagues aren't ready yet to be promoted. Tong is still in Double-A, and he's the guy who's been pitching the best. I would hope that he would be a little bit more aggressive on the trade market, because I think that this team probably was put together to compete for a championship, not build towards one over the next couple of years.
Yeah, David Stearns does have a reputation of being calculated and measured, but you feel like this is the moment he's got to be bold.
Absolutely. And look, I know that Luis Severino has not lit the world on fire out there with the A's, but if you dive a little bit deeper, he's had problems really only pitching at home in that minor league ballpark in Sacramento. Like, his ERA on the road is like 2.2. And I know he had a bad start at Yankee Stadium last week, but, there might have been other factors involved there. I would have no problem if the Mets said, come on back to Queens and all is right with the world again. But they're going to have to get over the money because, like I said, he did get paid pretty well. And I think he has an opt-out after next season. So the two teams are going to have to find a way to make the numbers work and whatnot. But, somebody like that, some of the bigger targets that maybe we identified earlier in the season, I don't think those guys are going to be available. And this market is still kind of taking shape because I guess as of right now, you would maybe only say like 6 or 7 teams probably would declare themselves dead. Like they're not going to win this year. They know that. Everybody else is still kind of in that limbo to where, all right, are we in? Are we out? Are we sellers? Are we buyers? So I think you're still going to have to wait probably at least for a little while, even after the All-Star break, before teams firmly make a decision on what the second half is going to be like for them.
What does it say about Stearns and the job that he's done here in year 2, that the Mets are the team with the highest payroll, and we're talking about all these areas that need to be shored up?
Yeah, isn't that amazing, right? Like, I've been talking about that for a while. It's crazy that even when they were like 20 games over 500, you said to yourself, okay, now the starting pitching, there's guys that are starting to go down. Maybe you're going to have to address that. Well, it's having more of a carryover effect on the bullpen. You could probably use another bullpen arm or two. Like, the Mets have been a team where it seems like every other day they're making a move, sending a guy down to the minor leagues and then bringing up a fresh arm just for the bullpen. Like when Griffin Canning, and that's another one, when Griffin Canning got hurt in that game against the Braves last week or whatever it was, the guy that came in cold, Austin Warren, out of the bullpen, really won them that game because he pitched like 2+ innings of scoreless relief. They sent him down to the minor leagues like the next day because they needed to get a fresh arm up here. So it's been crazy like that. So starting pitching, bullpen, and the way that they're not hitting with runners in scoring position, and the bottom of that lineup really has not produced consistently, you wouldn't be crazy to suggest they could use some help at the bottom of the lineup. So for a team that I guess overall has had a pretty good year, they sure do have a lot of needs, which is not really characteristic of a team that's played good baseball.
Are you concerned about the playoffs at this point?
In terms of making the playoffs?
Yeah.
No, I think they'll find a way to get in, even though the National League is a little bit deeper.
It is deep this year, yeah.
Right? Like we thought, like for instance, I never thought in a million years the Cardinals would be having the year that they're having. Like this was supposed to be a rebuilding year for them. I thought they were going to be dreadful. And yet they're right there in wild card contention in the National League. Now, how aggressive are they going to be leading up to the deadline? Teams like that, you got the outside of the Dodgers, the 3 teams out in the National League West, which we haven't heard the last of course. How much of a player are they going to be? I think the Mets would make the playoffs. Like, I still think when push comes to shove, they'll find a way to get in. But I'll tell you, if they don't, that would be a major, major disappointment.
And the starting pitching has had such a ripple effect because you talk about the first half of the season, the bullpen was a strength, but when the starters can't go 5 innings, and during this stretch, that has really been an issue. All of a sudden, you have some, good news is you have some guys in that bullpen that were lights out early on, but then that's what happens. Guys get overused, and it leads to slumps later on.
It's exactly it. And I think the stat that I saw was, I think it's been like 16 or 17 straight games where the Mets have not had a starting pitcher recording out in the 6th inning. And like you said, that adds up.
Yeah.
Like we were watching, the Yankees the other night in Toronto, with Rodon, and he could only go 5 innings. And even with the state of the Yankee bullpen the way it is, and you're like, man, that's like, if you take a step back, you're like, that's 12 outs that you have to ask your bullpen to get. Like that's a lot of real estate for any team. You know what I mean? That we're talking 4 innings here, and that's what this Met bullpen has been asked to absorb over the last few weeks here. And yeah, it's starting to show some cracks. Absolutely.
And we talk about the lineup as well in the bottom half of the lineup. You go into seasons and every team has questions, and you're never going to get positive answers on all the questions, but it feels like with a lot of the Mets young guys, they've got nothing but negative answers on those questions. Beatty hasn't stepped up. Vientos hasn't stepped up. Alvarez is in the minor leagues. Are you surprised that none of those young guys really have been able to provide you some offense at the bottom of that order?
I think yes and no is a good way to put it, because I think that it was something that was even on my radar going into the season. Everybody, the thing, like, if you go back to the winter when Juan Soto signed, remember like the reaction, especially from like Metland, it was, oh my God, they're going to the World Series.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the greatest. It's like, pump the brakes. It's one guy. It's one guy. The Angels once upon a time had Trout and Ohtani on the same team and did nothing. And that was 2 guys. Right? They never made the playoffs. So, yeah, you were still asking a lot of other guys that had to do their part, and a lot of it was being assumed. Like, Mark Vientos was great last year, Gordon, right? And he hit in the playoffs.
Yep,
everybody
absolutely.
just assumed that it was just gonna carry over. Well, that was the only time he'd ever done it before, right? So to me, the jury was still out. And as you know, it's been a struggle for him this year. Alvarez, ever since he came up as a rookie and he had that great rookie season, it's been a struggle. So he's struggled mightily this year, which got him sent back down to AAA. Beatty still has not come of age here. Thank goodness for a guy like Jeff McNeil, who hasn't been great, but he's at least been solid enough to where you put him in a different spot in the lineup and in the field, of course, and he could still come through with some hits with runners in scoring position. Nimmo has not had a great season this year at the plate, as they would hope. And remember, that's a guy what did they sign him to? A 7-year contract extension. So he's here for the long term. Maybe getting Jesse Winker's bat back in the lineup as a left-handed DH will help to a certain degree. I mean, they had Jared Young up here, as your left-handed DH option for a few weeks. And for the life of me, I'm sitting there saying, who's this Jared Young? Like, where do they find it? For a team with like an $8 gazillion payroll, like how are we down to Jared Young, right? But, like I said, it's been a sore spot. And it's not to say that the big 3 guys have been bad. The problem is that all 3 of them have not really fired on all cylinders at the same time. Like the first month or so, it was Lindor and Alonso doing the heavy lifting while Soto was still kind of finding his way. Then Soto had the unbelievable month of June, but Alonso and Lindor have slumped. You know what I mean? So I'm curious to see how this lineup looks, at least when those 3 guys are all hitting at the same time, but others can still step up and make a contribution. And they're going to have to if this team is going to, make another deep run.
And I would agree with you. I'm not concerned about the playoffs just yet, but it is strange that we even find ourselves in this position at 80-something games through the season, right? That's not really what we were expecting. Steve Cohen is an interesting guy because even 5 years in, I don't think that we get a real read on him as an owner. Obviously, he spends money, but could you see, this seems crazy to me to say, but could you see him forcing the hand of David Stearns and making a shakeup with the manager or a hitting coach or something along those lines?
It's possible. Like, I was thinking about it the other day. Like, remember a couple of years ago when they had the fire sale, right? Like when what was it? So it would be 2023, like the real bad season with Buck Showalter, and they had Scherzer and Verlander, and they had the sell-off at the deadline. They got rid of all those guys. That only happened because Steve Cohen gave the green light because he's like, you know what? I'll eat the contracts. right? I'll pay them down, even though we still owe these guys a ridiculous amount of money. That's the only way those trades were able to be executed, because Steve said, hey, I'll shuttle the cost. Kind of like what the Knicks are doing with, Tom Thibodeau's contract, right, for the next 3 years. But it's still, and look, we've watched baseball a long time, right? And we both know it's a marathon. And, even the best teams go through their lulls. The 98 Yankees slumped in September. You know what I mean? Like it happens. But it is still a little weird how the Mets would go into Pittsburgh, for example, and the Pirates are not good. The Pirates are like the worst offensive team in the National League, even worse than the Rockies. And they suffer the most lopsided 3-game series in the history of their franchise, not just to Pittsburgh, but to anybody, getting outscored 30-4. That shouldn't happen. So something is not wired properly right now. And, the day off that they had on Monday, it was like 16 days straight of playing games. Like, that I think helped at least a little bit. And I do think this team will benefit from getting away, period, for the All-Star break for about a week. But you still got some tough competition coming up, before then, between Milwaukee and the Yankees. And, they go to Baltimore, Kansas City. You can't even chalk up teams under 500. If you couldn't beat the Pirates, you can't sit there and say you're going to beat anybody. So they just got to get to the All-Star break and not suffer any more injuries, knock on wood, is I think what this team has to have in its immediate future.
All right, so we're sitting here in July. It's all about baseball season, but it's never not football season, and it won't be long before training camp is here. You do the pre and post for the Jets, entering the Aaron Glenn era. What have you had the chance to interact with him, and what are your thoughts about year one under Aaron Glenn?
On a one-on-one level, just very, very briefly. Like in the off season, things are you're not really as hands-on as much. Hopefully I'll get an opportunity once we get back up and going here, training camp, and then into the season, of course, doing what I got to do for the team. But everything that I've witnessed, everything that I've heard just from people that are a little more hands-on, it's all business. It really is. It's all football. It's all about getting the work. It's all about coming with the right attitude. It's, forget about the cameras, forget about the microphones. And this, I mean, it's a departure from the way that it's been for the last handful of years, right? Where maybe at one point this organization welcomed the attention and welcomed all the spotlight and, the Aaron Rodgers and Hard Knocks and all that. Aaron Glenn is the furthest thing from that. Like he is all business and just wants this team to focus on what they have to do on the field. I mean, just even the way some of the practices were being run during the offseason, like OTAs and the mini camps and stuff. I'll tell you a story. There was one day for OTAs. This is OTAs. These are voluntary, not mandatory. And, you don't want to risk anything, of course. In all my years of covering football, even at the slightest risk of like rain during the offseason, they're inside, right? They take the team inside. Why risk it? It's the offseason. There was one of the days for OTAs, it was pouring rain. And I just assumed, hey, I'm showing up, I will be inside. Nope, outside. He had that team outside on the grass field in a rainstorm for 2 hours. And of course, we had to, as media, have to sit up there and watch it as well, getting wet in the rain. But I think it sends a message that, it's coming with the right attitude, and you hear that culture term. Now, look, at the end of the day, that could all fall on deaf ears if you don't win games. You know that. But he'll have a little bit of a grace period, certainly, for that first season. And I don't think anybody's expecting playoffs in year one. But what I will say is that this isn't like your typical rebuild to where the roster and the cupboard is bare. I mean, you got some talented players on this team. And as you know, coaching in the NFL probably makes the most difference in all the sports.
Yeah, it's a coaching league, no question. I say that all the time.
It's a coaching league.
Yeah.
It is a coaching league, right? And, we remember – gosh, it was 30 years ago where, a Rich Kotite team in 96 had good players on paper. They went 1-15. Bill Parcells came in the next year with virtually the same roster, and they won 9 games. Not saying that the Jets are going to have that type of turnaround with Aaron Glenn, but I do think things are going to be, buttoned up a lot more than, let's say, they've been the last couple of years. And it's going to be more about team and more about, the structure as a whole compared to just, last year got really chaotic, especially once they changed coaches, and it was kind of like every man for themselves. So
yeah.
It's not going to be that.
What's a fair expectation for year one?
fair expectation is, I think, I hate to use that word again, the culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
That a program being put into place, not beating yourself, not making stupid mistakes. If that translates to a lot more wins, so be it. But I think, realistically speaking, and the schedule that this team has to play, I would say, 7-8 wins, I don't think is unrealistic, outrageous. And, I think the real home run would be if somehow, some way, Justin Fields is able to put it all together in his third stop. And maybe you have a quarterback that you could play with moving forward and win with, because that's the other thing. You have a new coaching staff, but you also have a brand new quarterback. If those two can sync, hand in hand, and you have a staff which you believe in, and now you stumbled upon a quarterback, which is also maybe the answer for you, well, that's the best of both worlds. But I think that, they're going to be solid at the line of scrimmage. The offensive line is in a good place. I think the offensive line is probably in the best place it's been in quite a while. And I don't think they're going to be flashy on offense. They're going to run the ball. That's what they want to do. You got 3 backs that they like. You got a quarterback who's got the ability to run the football. It's going to be kind of a smash mouth, maybe old school type of attack offensively here. And, if it gets the job done, I think the fans will embrace that.
I think fans would love that. I mean, I think they're just looking for functioning, after all these years of the game and the season being out of control by, Halloween a lot of times, they're just looking for any success whatsoever. And it's not really about the wins and the losses at the end. Like, as long as you can have some good wins along the way, right? So it doesn't even matter if you win 5 games, but if you beat the Bills one time and you beat this team, you beat some good teams along the way. The worst thing I think you can do, and I think the worst thing that the Giants ever did, was take that honeymoon period of that first year and have actual success, because that resets the bar completely. So if the 100%. Jets do struggle this year, so be it. But at least you can see some signs of, hey, this is something that we're building here. And there'll be things, I don't know, maybe they don't have the quarterback. Maybe the defense needs another piece or something. They need more weapons. You figure that out in year 1. But at least as long as you can see that there's people in control that actually know what they're doing, that is a huge upgrade from where it's been for a very long time.
And you said the word control there. And that's the other thing that is apparent to me, is that this is Aaron Glenn's show. Like, it really and truly is. Like, he is the face of the organization, even though he doesn't necessarily like to get out in front of it, but it is his show. Like, make no mistake about it. It's his program, and everybody in the organization is more than fine with that. They believe in this guy. They're letting him do things his way. Now, granted, he's a first-time head coach, but he's paid his dues. He's learned under some of the best, as we know, had success in Detroit, as apart from this player or this quarterback or this person that's going to be, posterized and, splashed out and everything. It is Aaron Glenn's program, and you either get in line or, you're not going to be here long. It's as simple as that.
What's going on with the contracts of Gardner and Garrett Wilson? Do you think those get done before the start of the season?
Everything that I've heard, it's moving in the right direction. And I think that it will. And I know, again, you don't want to stress and put too much on the off season, right? Because it's the off season, the underwear Olympics, all that stuff. But I do think, and they spoke to this, that the fact that Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, and others were there for the whole off season, were there for minicamp, but especially those two guys, because they are playing for contract extensions. Some players wouldn't even show, like, TJ Watt in Pittsburgh. He wants more money, and rightfully so. He didn't show up to mandatory minicamp for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that's the Steelers. Everything is supposed to be fine and dandy and everybody all buying in there. The fact that these guys were there and they're buying in already to this new regime before even playing a game for this coaching staff, I think that does speak volumes about where this thing is headed. And, you do get that buy-in from some of the guys, because I think the guys that have been here for the last, 3, 4, 5 years, they're tired of the way things have gone. Right? I mean, they're embracing change because the losing is taking a toll. I mean, trust me, I see it with these guys. I mean, I talk to these guys. Somebody like Garrett Wilson, for example, and I say this a lot. Garrett Wilson, you think about like his life as a football player from like high school, where he won all the time. He went to Ohio State. How many games did he lose in Ohio State? Like the few years that he was there, maybe, I could count on one hand, probably less. And then to come to the Jets and all you've done is lose. Like it literally just is like wearing these guys down. And so, I mean, I saw Garrett about a month ago and was talking to him or whatever. And he's, I have a good relationship with him, but it's just like he is a completely different person than the guy that I talked to last December while that season was coming down to its conclusion. Like it's like night and day. And I think that air has kind of permeated the entire building to where, okay, new slate, let's get after it.
Moving on to the other team, the Giants. I'm interested to see at what point, because I don't see any way that this turns out good. And when we get to the end of the season, I would be shocked if there's not a coaching change, a GM change. At what point in the season do you think we'll get to it and think, you know what, the Giants should have made that change last offseason? Or are you more optimistic about the Giants?
What's weird about it, like with the Giants, I like what they did on paper defensively. Like I think their defense has a chance to be really, really good. Like they retooled the secondary, they got a lot younger. I like what they did there. I mean, their pass rush should be really good, like by all accounts. The problem is, and I hate to play the schedule game, but we're all guilty of it. Like on paper, it looks menacing, doesn't it? I mean, it's just.
I get it. In July, it certainly does. And it'll be different when we get to September for sure, but it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be better.
No doubt. But you look at the games that they have on paper. I mean, just show me where you're coming up with even 8 wins. It's brutal. So Giants could be like a classic case of better football team. They play better. They're more cohesive, more functional, all those things, but they might not have that quantum leap in the standings to justify it. And if that's the case, when the jury is, time to decide, and that's John Mara at the end of the year, am I moving forward with Dable? Am I moving forward with Joe Shane? He's going to have to let his eyes do the talking and not just look at the standings, because they may only win, let's say 5 or 6 because of the schedule, but it's 5 or 6 good enough to where you say, all right, I'm all on board.
I just look at what they're juggling. They're juggling, a veteran quarterback at the position while also trying to break in a rookie at some point in the year, also trying to win games for an organization that has not won games. And I don't even know that they necessarily addressed their offensive line is still not a strength. Andrew Thomas is good when he plays, but the guy's always hurt. And he's the one guy that you would say is, okay, for sure, he's an answer at left tackle, but the rest of it is a mess. And I just don't, it's amazing for having high draft picks every single year, outside of a couple of pieces here or there on offense, I don't even think that they're really all that, set up for success.
No, you're right. And that's why I singled out the defense, because offensively, aside from Malik Neighbors,
that's about it.
They leave
and
a lot
maybe
to be
Tracy
desired.
is a running back. I mean, we'll see.
Maybe, if he stops putting the ball on the ground.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, the offensive line is almost the same. They really don't have anybody else to draw the defense's attention away from Neighbors. And I joke only because, now Darren Waller, who is on your team, which
not a serious organization.
Gordon, what were the odds? Like, seriously, like a couple of years ago, and God bless the guy trying something different. But what were the odds that Darren Waller was not going to be the next Drake? When it came to his music career.
Oh my God! I mean,
when was the realization that Darren Waller, he woke up one morning and said, you know what? God put me on this earth to be a football player. He gave me the God-given ability to go out there, run fast, and catch a football, and do all those things and make a lot of money. Maybe not be an R&B star.
No, that's not going to work. I'll tell you right now, going to Miami is not going to work either. At least we didn't give up a 3rd-round pick like the Giants did for Darren Waller a couple of years ago. I think it's only a 6th-rounder, which, we throw those around like fun coupons off the side of the 6th-round pick. Who needs those down in Miami? What a disaster.
How about all this activity from your team? Like, this is supposed to be the dead period. Like 2 straight days, major trades.
They are not a serious organization. I don't know what. And it's amazing. You would think as an owner, if you own, I say this all the time, if you own something, even if you didn't know, right? Like it's a nuclear power plant, right? You don't know anything about nuclear power. But if you owned it, Dan, for 20 years, you'd know more at the end of the 20 years than at the beginning of the 20 years. The owner down in Miami, Stephen Ross, he's owned the team for almost 2 decades. He's not any better at owning a team than he was when he first got the keys to the franchise. It's a disaster. They are a mess. This is a great stat that I learned in the last couple of weeks. There have been 4 popes since the last time the Dolphins won a playoff game. And I'm sure before too long, there'll be a 5th pope before they win another playoff game.
Let's see. John Paul, we had Benedict.
Right.
And we had
Benedict, bad in the big spot. Benedict, bad spot for Benedict. I mean,
Benedict.
Yeah. I don't know popes.
I mean, Benedict, he opted out. He had an opt-out.
Right.
And I guess, like,
who even knew?
Contract. Yeah, the Pope contract, you're not supposed to have an opt-out. Like, that's till death do you part, basically.
It's supposed to.
That's
I know that much.
That's the deal with the Pope.
Right.
Right?
Bad in the big spot, the Benedict guy. Talking about maybe opting. Well, they didn't opt out, but the Knicks coaching search, I think it's been a month now since Tom Thibodeau was let go. I don't know, maybe by the time this airs, they'll have Mike Brown in there. Where are your thoughts as we sit here and record this about the Knicks coaching search, and how concerned are you?
It would be funny if they still don't have one in place by the summer league, because then what happens?
Right.
Like, does like the team just like show up in a van and they decide like who plays because they don't have adult supervision? Like, how does that work? You know, like they don't have a coach.
It feels like to me they've always wanted Jason Kidd. And until I see Jason Kidd get a contract extension, I still think that that's in the mix. But you know what the problem is that this is taking so long that it feels like unless there's immediate success for whoever it is, Mike Brown, Taylor Jenkins, there's going to be like this cloud hanging over him. If Jason Kidd ever gets let go in Dallas, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to be like the Knicks really don't even want who they're going to eventually get. And it feels like there's going to almost be like this cloud hanging over this guy, whoever it is.
You know, it's true. And you know, I've been saying whoever it is, that you can't even make a judgment on if he did a good job or a bad job. It's going to take almost a year. Yeah.
They have to get to the NBA Finals. If whoever this is does not get to an NBA Finals, it's a failure in year one. You know that walking in the door.
Hey, we're not making this up. Like, we're just going by what their statement was.
Their own, right. They don't talk
go.
to us to tell us otherwise, so you have to go by what they're giving you. And if it seems clear that they didn't know going into this who they wanted to be the coach, but they knew that Tom Thibodeau was a problem, right? They fired him immediately, and now they've had a month. It wasn't like they had some guy in the wings that was like, hey, we know this guy. It's not Joe Torre replacing Buck Showalter. They didn't look around for Joe Torre for months and months. They got Joe Torre basically right away. So the fact that they knew Tom Thibodeau was not the answer, even though they didn't know who was the answer.
Right. And like you said, things are leaning towards Mike Brown. And I guess the reports are that Dolan's going to sit in the second interview with Mike Brown. So, I mean, obviously, you know, you bring in the parents when things are getting serious, right? You know, meet the parents. If it's Mike Brown, great. You know, like I still think at the end of the day, you know, where we talked about football with the coaches.
Right. It's a talent league.
I mean, look at the guy who just won the championship. Did anybody even bat an eye when Mark Dagnall got the Thunder job? Nobody knew who he was.
No.
Nobody knew who he was. And they were they were bad for a couple of years as they were building this thing. And then all of a sudden they were able to keep guys healthy. You know, the youngsters came of age and they ended up being NBA champions. If this Knicks roster is basically set. The heavy hitters, they're on this team already. You know, unless, you know, they do like shock the world and make some blockbuster trade, but I just can't see that happening because you don't have a coach yet. You know what I mean? Like,
apparently it's not that important. Apparently it's not that important. No, it doesn't really. As long as it's not Tom Thibodeau. That's the only thing we do know. As long as it's not Tom Thibodeau. We got to get him out. And we don't know who's the replacement. But it could be anybody. It could be this guy. It could be that guy. It could be Dawn Staley. Who knows? It could be anybody.
Anybody but Tibbs, ABT. That's who the coach is going to be for the Knicks. But it's crazy because, like, look at you see the latest odds. Like, I think they've got the third odds to win a championship, and they're best in the Eastern Conference. Like, the Knicks are going to go into the season, barring something crazy, as the favorite to win the Eastern Conference. When was the last time that happened? When Jordan was playing baseball?
Yeah, probably. Well, look, they
Right?
better. They better, because if they don't, I don't want to hear any excuses, because we gave every complaint about Tibbs. I heard it. He doesn't do this. He doesn't. The results did not matter. The fact that they beat the Celtics and got to an Eastern Conference Finals, that did not matter. They were supposed to get even further than that. So that we know going into the year, we always ask about expectations for this team or that team, and it's kind of a gray area. With the Knicks, it's not a gray area. It is black and white. For sure.
Right. And you can't even, whoever gets the job, I mean, you think about the pressure, because it's almost like a no-win situation.
Absolutely.
You must get this far or you didn't do a good job.
Absolutely. All right, one final one. I know you're all into Wimbledon with the Sirius XM and doing the shows there with Tracy Austin. Any reason to believe that Alcaraz isn't going to win again?
I mean, anything can happen. I mean, he got pushed to 5 sets in his opening match by Fabio Fognini, which is an unconventional first-round matchup because Fognini, it was his last match ever. He was retiring. He's an experienced veteran player. He beat Nadal at the U.S. Open, for crying out loud, once upon a time in his career. So he was a dangerous player. I didn't expect it to go 5 sets and be pushed on grass. But, sometimes you get tested, even though you win a Grand Slam. He's still the best on this surface. Now, Jannik Sinner, who's the number 1 ranked player on the men's side, Sinner and Alcaraz, it's them two and then a considerable drop to everybody else in the men's game, right? But Sinner has never made a final at Wimbledon. So he still has to prove that he can get to that stage on grass. The surface has not been the most kind to him necessarily. And then people want to throw Djokovic's name out there still. I mean, I don't think he's winning another slam at 38 years of age, but Wimbledon represents his best chance just because the surface, the shorter rallies, the quicker points. So for somebody for his age, he's able to keep up. And, Djokovic has been in the last 6 Wimbledon finals. He won 4 in a row, and then he lost the last 2 to Alcaraz. I would be very surprised if he even made it that far this year. But, I expect Alcaraz to be there on Championship Sunday. The question is, will Sinner be on the other side of the net? Perhaps. We've already had some upsets here in the first round, which is crazy. But if I'm a betting man, I would probably say that Alcaraz wins his 3rd in a row.
All right, so the headline that stopped me in my tracks, courtesy of the New York Post. God bless the New York Post. Nobody does a headline like the New York Post. Their headline, Deshaun Watson taking Shedeur Sanders under his wing as mentor to Browns quarterback. I'm sorry, what now? The Browns have 12 quarterbacks currently on their roster, and they decide to have Deshaun Watson mentor the next generation. The next quarterback of the future for the Cleveland Browns. Deshaun Watson's going to show them the ropes. The same guy who missed, an entire season because I think it was, 24 sexual misconduct lawsuits? After a while, you just kind of lose count. I think there's still that are still up in the air legally. There's nobody else available? What's next? Michael Vick going to swing by and teach some dog obedience classes? Maybe Shedeur can give Watson some driving tips. Make this whole thing full circle. This is the best you've got. A locker room full of quarterbacks, and the guy who ruined his career, that's the guy we're going to have mentor the next generation. Well, what you do is you pretend the towel fell off of you. It's unbelievable. Even by Cleveland Browns standards, that is ridiculous. That's a story I don't see having a happy ending. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. All right, so let's talk about the NBA team that just does not want to face reality, and it's kind of getting embarrassing, and that would be the Milwaukee Bucks. They go out, they sign Miles Turner. They go out and they cut ties with Damian Lillard. So the Bucks will now be paying $22 million a year for the next 5 years to not have Damian Lillard on their roster, just to clear out enough cap space to bring in Turner. And look, let's be honest, this isn't about Turner at all. This is about a franchise that just can't admit it's over and is doing anything desperately just to keep Giannis happy and to keep him from saying, I want out. And it reminds you of like a couple where one person in the relationship already has a foot out the door emotionally, and the other person is just trying to hold on, trying to recreate the magic, and it's just not working. And that's the Milwaukee Bucks right now. They're the person that's in denial, and they're sitting there saying, hey, we still got Giannis. We still got a shot as long as we keep him happy. And I get it. I guess in the Eastern Conference, with it going to be down next year, I guess technically they do. But this just shows you how quickly these championship windows close, right? The Bucks, they bring in Drew Holiday. They win a title. Great move. They flip Holiday for Dame. They pair Giannis and Dame. Oh, man, it's going to be unbelievable. They'll push for another ring. And that duo played 3 playoff games together. And at this point, they got bounced in the first round 3 straight years. You have Lillard tearing the Achilles, and now he's gone with a massive cap penalty attached. And this move for Turner, this is not a calculated roster upgrade. This is a franchise looking at a cracked foundation and saying, hey, you know what? Let's repaint the walls. Let's redo the kitchen. They've run out of trade assets. They've capped themselves out. They've made the moves they can make, and it didn't work. And now it's clear they would be better off moving into rebuild mode and put Giannis out there and bring back a boatload of assets and picks and move on to the next phase of whatever your franchise is going to be. Because even if he stays, is this a championship level contender? They just made the future muddier. And their entire strategy has been based on, hey, as long as we have Giannis, we have a shot. Well, they've had Giannis the last 3 years, and they've been bounced in the first round. Sometimes the bravest thing to do in sports, in life, is to admit it's over, and then you can move on to what that next thing is going to be. And this version of the Bucks, it's over. They won a title. That's something. But the longer they deny the reality, the worse position they put themselves in for whenever they finally have that moment of clarity and realize, oh, geez, we got to move on. And unfortunately, it seems like that's only going to happen when Giannis says he wants out, and they will have put themselves in the worst position to turn the page. All right, that will do it for another episode of Gordon Damer on Sports. If you've not done it already, hey, hit that subscribe button, like the episode, rate the episode. I don't know what you're listening to this on. Whatever it is, hit a couple of buttons, visit the website, GordonDamer.com. Enjoy your 4th of July, and we'll be back next week with a fresh edition, Gordon Damer on Sports.